Today we're going to work, I have half a dozen of these Avet LX 60 reels that we use for trolling, and they seem to be holding up pretty well. This will be their third season, and the only thing I really do to them is in the wintertime is take them apart and clean out any old grease and replace the grease. So to do this, you're going to need 2 Phillips head screwdrivers, a number 1 and number 2. This is an 11mm socket. I have a pair of tweezers, some Q-tips, some paper towels, some real lube, and some real oil here. So let's get started. Also, you'll notice I'm working on a soft towel, and that's for when little screws fall off the reel. They will get stuck on the towel and not drop onto the floor and roll away. So the first thing we're going to do is take this reel handle off, and there's 2 panhead Phillips head screws on here. I'm going to remove those. Just out of camera, I have a little an old cookie sheet that I'm putting parts on, so I keep stuff in order. There's a retaining clip that comes off next. 11mm socket. Take this acorn nut off. Underneath the acorn nut, when you remove this handle, there's going to be actually 2 washers. One that stays on top, and one that goes underneath on the bearing side. And the one on the bearing side has a little lip on it. So you put this back together, that lip goes to the bearing. Now we could take the drag lever off, and just do that by unscrewing the preset knob. That'll come off. We're going to set that aside. Next thing, we have these 3 housing screws, and that's a number 2 Phillips head. Make sure you press in pretty hard when undoing these. You don't want to strip them out. Okay, this housing is going to have a little bit of spring to it. You saw that. So just keep that in mind when we reassemble it. We're going to want to look for that same springiness. I'm going to pull out this entire spool. See the back of this housing here has got some old grease. I'm going to put a couple drops of oil. A little cavity there behind the clicker. Okay, this spool shaft just slides out, and there's going to be some washers on the end, and on this side there's going to be a spring, 2 washers, and a bearing. On the other side there's a bearing, spacer, 4 washers. I'm just going to wipe all this off. There's no old grease on. I'm not going to bother removing all these pieces. Bearings on both sides of the spool shaft are open, so just lube them with some oil. I'm just going to put that right back in the hole. Drag side bearing is also open, so just lube it with some real oil. Bearing goes first, then one of the washers, then the drag spring, then another washer. I'm going to wipe off this drag friction plate. You can see some of the black residue on it. Some people lubricate these, and some people like them dry. I've never lubricated a brake pad on a car, never lubricated a clutch disc on a car. So I don't know why I would want to lubricate the brakes on my reel. To each his own. Okay, this spool assembly is done and ready for reassembly. Before we reassemble this, I'm going to try to get some wax, just some automotive wax, on some of these places that I can't reach when it's all assembled. Take this side of the reel off. This is the drag plate. Flip it over. There's a pinion gear that may or may not come out with it. It may stay in this bearing here. Pinion gear has a long, thinner shaft and a short, stubbier shaft that's a little wider. It only goes in one way to this bearing in this housing, and that is long side into there. So we'll set that aside. We're going to wipe these off. Next, we're going to remove this anti-reverse pawl here. #1 screwdriver, Phillips. These are flatheads, so you won't get them confused with the keeper plate for the reel handle itself. I'll set these aside. This is the keeper plate for the pawl. So cutout here specifically for the gear, so this only mounts in one direction, so you're not going to mess that up. Alright, I'm going to get a close up of this pawl. This pawl, the teeth, or the tooth I should say, points at the gear. So if you need to, take a photograph of this for when you're putting it back together. Take this shaft out. I'm going to take this ring gear out, and on the back of this will be a washer. These bearings are both sealed, so if they're bad, you replace them. And you'll notice that they're bad when you're reeling. The rod would be very difficult to reel in. I don't have any of those symptoms, so we're just lubricating today. All right, I'm going to put a dab of grease on here, and that'll hold the washer for me. Smear a little grease on the back of this ring gear. This ring gear only goes in one way. You'll see the square indentation on it. That goes up. Get some grease on this, on the teeth. Okay, gonna drop that in the hole. My pinion gear. Give that a little shot of grease. Remember, the long tail, long skinny tail is going to go into this bearing here. I'm going to drop this shaft in with the pawl lever. You're going to need to rotate that a little bit to get it to seat in that square indentation. If this lever falls off, this is a spring clip on here. You'll see, hopefully you can see, there's this one tang on the spring clip, and that wants to go on top of this bar. And then on this side, the pin is going to stick up. Put a little dab of grease for that pawl. And when you put this pawl back in, you need to get the pin from that lever in this tiny hole in the pawl. Okay, you'll know you have it right when you could wiggle this shaft and it'll move back and forth. Okay, another little dab just for the top of that. Remember I said this only goes one way. These are the flathead screws. Just want to snug these up. You don't want to over tighten them and strip them. If you can see in there, there's that drift pin wants to fit into these slots. So get it in there. There you go. You could bring the two sides back together. You'll see when you put these halves together, there's some spring to the two pieces. Hold that in when you get your screws started. Number 2. So got some wax on my rag here. I'll just hit this before I assemble it. Alright, I'm just going to put a little grease on these shafts. Again, not for lube purposes, but for hopefully keep some of the water out. Okay, this is the drag lever. Just a little dab in there. This washer has a lip on it. The lip goes to the bearing. Then the reel handle goes back on. Got a flat washer that goes over that. Acorn nut. Okay, last thing is this keeper. Just line up the screw holes. Number 1 Phillips head, and these are the pan head screws. Not the flat heads that we use for the pole cover. Get them started. Ready to mount this back on the rod. Probably going to wax those as well. Alright, that's about all there is to it. Hopefully I'll see you out there in the Raritan Bay in a couple weeks. Tight lines, everyone. Thanks for watching.